Most people know Interpol through one phrase, Red Notice. In popular culture, it sounds like a borderless arrest warrant, a kind of global switch that instantly mobilizes police across the planet. But that view misses how the system actually works. Interpol is not a world police force, and its notices are not magical legal commands. They are structured international alerts, built to move information faster than criminals, missing persons cases, disaster investigations, and sanctions violations can move across borders. That distinction matters because the real power of the notice system is not direct enforcement. It is coordination. Interpol connects national police agencies in more than 190 member countries, giving them a common framework for sharing urgent operational information. A notice can help identify a fugitive, locate a missing child, flag a repeat offender, trace criminal assets, warn of an explosive device, or circulate the methods used by a trafficking network. The system is less like a global badge and more like a multilingual alert architecture for law enforcement. Seen from that angle, the notices reveal something larger about modern policing. Crime, migration, finance, and communications now move internationally by default. A suspect can cross several jurisdictions in hours. Money can be layered through offshore structures in minutes. A person reported missing in one country can surface at a border checkpoint in another. Without a standardized mechanism for distributing alerts, every case would depend on slower bilateral contacts, fragmented databases, and uneven institutional relationships. That is why Interpol's notice system matters. It is designed to turn national investigations into internationally legible signals. Each color, each category, and each protocol reflects a different policing problem. Arrest, identification, warning, intelligence, or asset recovery. To understand how this system really works, the first step is to stop looking at the famous notice and start looking at the structure behind the colors. To understand the notice system, the next step is to look at its basic architecture. Interpol does not operate as a single centralized police agency issuing commands downward. It operates as a network of sovereign states, each linked through a National Central Bureau, or NCB. Every member country maintains one of these bureaus, and that bureau acts as the official gateway between domestic law enforcement and the wider Interpol system. That design is the foundation of everything that follows. When a country wants to circulate an alert, it does not bypass legal institutions at home and publish directly to the world in a vacuum. The request moves through national authorities, then through the NCB, and then into Interpol's communications and review channels. On the receiving side, the same pattern applies in reverse. Information arrives internationally, but action is always filtered through national law, domestic procedure, and local investigative priorities. This is why an Interpol notice is best understood as a transmission layer between jurisdictions. It standardizes how police information is formatted, categorized, and routed. A fugitive case in one country can therefore be understood by border police, criminal investigators, or judicial authorities in another without requiring a custom diplomatic exchange every time. The system reduces friction by creating common notice types, common identifiers, and common operational expectations. That architecture also explains a common misconception. A notice does not erase the differences between legal systems. One country may treat a notice as grounds for provisional detention under its laws or treaty obligations. Another may use it only as an investigative lead. The alert is international, but enforcement remains national. Historically, that networked model became more important as travel, Digital finance and transnational organized crime accelerated. The problem was no longer just sharing information. It was sharing it in a way that could be processed quickly and consistently. Interpol's answer was to build a color-coded system for different policing needs. And the most famous of those categories begins with the notice that attracts the most attention: red. Red notices dominate headlines because they appear to represent the sharpest edge of international policing. In practical terms, they are requests to locate and provisionally detain a wanted person pending extradition, surrender, or similar legal action. That wording is important. A red notice is not an international arrest warrant issued by a supranational court. It is a request circulated through Interpol's system on the basis of a national judicial decision, and its legal effect depends entirely on how each member country chooses to treat it under domestic law. That makes the red notice both powerful and limited. Powerful because it can place a fugitive's identity into border systems, police databases, and investigative workflows across a vast international network. Limited because Interpol itself does not arrest anyone, extradite anyone, or compel a state to act. The notice creates visibility. It does not create universal enforcement authority. Structurally, a red notice begins with a domestic case. A court, prosecutor, or other competent judicial authority in the requesting country issues the underlying legal basis, usually an arrest warrant or comparable order. That request is transmitted through the country's National Central Bureau, reviewed against Interpol's rules, and then circulated if approved. The notice typically includes identifiers, case details, legal characterizations, and instructions relevant to apprehension or location. Operationally, this matters most at points where mobility meets bureaucracy. A person may be identified during a passport check, a visa screening, a traffic stop, a financial compliance review, or a routine police inquiry. Once flagged, national authorities decide what happens next. In one jurisdiction, officers may detain the subject pending a formal extradition request. In another, they may only record the sighting and notify the requesting state. Over time, red notices became the public face of Interpol, precisely because they sit at the intersection of law, sovereignty, and mobility. But they are only one tool in a much wider system. Because many cases do not begin with a known fugitive at all, the next layer of the notice framework deals with something even more basic: identifying who the authorities are actually looking for. Not every international case starts with a name. In many investigations, the first problem is not capturing a fugitive, but determining who the person is in the first place. That is where blue and black notices become essential. They handle a quieter but equally important stage of policing: identification, tracing, and information development before a case reaches the arrest phase associated with a red notice. A blue notice is used to collect additional information about a person's identity, location, or activities in relation to a criminal investigation. It is the notice for incomplete pictures. Authorities may know a suspect is moving across borders, using aliases, or appearing in multiple investigative threads, but still lack enough verified information to support arrest or extradition action. In that setting, the goal is to turn fragments into a coherent profile that different jurisdictions can recognize. A black notice serves a different function. It is used to seek information on unidentified bodies. That places the notice system inside a broader humanitarian and forensic mission, not just a fugitive tracking framework. A body recovered in one country may belong to a person reported missing in another, and that identification can matter for homicide investigations, disaster response, trafficking cases, or simple family notification. The notice therefore links police work, forensic science, and international data comparison. Operationally, both notices show that Interpol's system is designed for uncertainty as much as certainty. Investigators often begin with incomplete documents, conflicting witness statements, biometric fragments, or transnational travel patterns that do not yet resolve into a full legal case. Blue notices help agencies fill those gaps. Black notices help them restore identity where identity has been lost entirely. This layer of the system became increasingly important as mobility, false documentation, and cross-border disappearances became more common features of modern investigations. Before authorities can arrest, extradite, or prosecute, they often need a more precise answer to a simpler question: who is this person? And once identity is established, the system expands beyond suspects and bodies to another urgent category altogether: people who may still be alive and need to be found quickly. Some of the most urgent Interpol notices are not about suspects at all. They are about people in danger, people missing, or people whose movements may signal harm before a crime is fully understood. This is where yellow notices and related humanitarian alert mechanisms reveal a different side of the system. They show that international police coordination is not only about pursuit, it is also about recovery, safeguarding, and rapid identification across borders. A yellow notice is used to help locate missing persons, often minors, or to identify people who cannot identify themselves. In practical terms, this can involve children taken across borders, vulnerable adults separated from caregivers, or individuals found in circumstances where language, trauma, age, or disability prevents them from stating who they are. The notice turns a domestic missing person case into an international search signal, allowing border authorities and police services in other countries to recognize the case if the individual appears. This matters because missing person investigations change rapidly once borders are involved. A child can be moved by car, ferry, or aircraft before local authorities have fully mapped the route. A vulnerable adult may drift through transport hubs, shelters, or hospitals without carrying usable identification. A case that begins as a local disappearance can therefore become an international coordination problem within hours. Yellow notices are designed to compress that response time. Operationally, these notices depend on descriptive detail: names, photographs, distinguishing features, family links, travel context, and circumstances of disappearance. The goal is not enforcement, but recognition. A patrol officer, immigration official, social worker liaison, or consular channel may become the point where the case breaks open. Over time, this humanitarian function has become more visible because modern mobility increases both risk and recovery potential. The same transport systems that make cross-border disappearance easier also create more checkpoints where a circulated alert can be matched. But locating missing people is only one side of prevention. In many cases, authorities are not just looking for someone already lost. They are trying to warn the world about a person, method, or threat before more harm occurs. Warnings are a different kind of police instrument. They do not wait for a fugitive to be identified, a body to be named, or a missing person to surface. They exist to push risk information outward before an incident repeats itself. In the Interpol system, that function is handled most clearly through green and orange notices, two categories designed to circulate preventive intelligence rather than purely reactive case data. A green notice is used to warn member countries about a person who has committed criminal offenses and is likely to repeat them in other countries. It is not primarily an arrest tool. It is a behavioral alert. The logic is straightforward. Some offenders are mobile, opportunistic, and persistent, particularly in cases involving sexual offenses, organized fraud, or crimes targeting vulnerable populations. If one country has credible reason to believe an individual may reoffend abroad, the wider network can be alerted before that person enters a new jurisdiction unnoticed. An orange notice serves a broader threat warning role. It is used to warn about an event, person, object, or process representing a serious and imminent danger to public safety. That could include disguised explosive devices, hazardous concealment methods, novel smuggling techniques, or operational tactics that authorities in other countries may encounter with little warning. In that sense, the orange notice functions less like a case file and more like a rapid distribution channel for tactical risk intelligence. These notices show that Interpol's color system is not built only around people. It is built around policing problems. Sometimes the relevant question is who to arrest. Sometimes it is what to watch for, what pattern to recognize, or what method is spreading through criminal networks faster than formal investigations can conclude. That preventive logic became more important as criminal techniques grew more adaptive and globally transferable. A concealment method tested once in one region can appear days later in another. An offender profile flagged in one country may match unsolved incidents elsewhere. But warning systems become even more consequential when the issue is not a single person or tactic, but an entire network of property, money, and criminal infrastructure moving through the global economy. Following money across borders is often harder than following people. A suspect can change routes, names, or documents, but financial activity leaves a different kind of trail. Bank transfers, shell companies, account identifiers, property holdings, and beneficial ownership structures that move through multiple legal systems at once. In the Interpol framework, this is where purple notices and special international alerts tied to asset tracing, criminal methods, and sanctions-related cooperation begin to matter. They help convert financial complexity into operationally usable intelligence. A purple notice is used to share information about criminals' methods, objects, devices, or concealment techniques. At first glance, that may sound technical and secondary. In practice, it is often central to understanding how illicit money and criminal logistics actually move. A fraud network may use a repeat pattern of forged corporate records. A trafficking ring may rely on standardized transport concealment. A cyber-enabled group may deploy familiar laundering pathways through payment processors, digital platforms, or front businesses. The notice is meant to capture these repeatable mechanics so other jurisdictions can recognize them early. This matters because transnational crime increasingly depends on infrastructure, not just individual offenders. Networks survive leadership changes when their payment methods, document pipelines, and logistical routines remain intact. By circulating those techniques, police agencies can identify linked cases that would otherwise look unrelated. A customs seizure in one country, a bank compliance alert in another, and a document fraud inquiry somewhere else may all point to the same operating model. Operationally, this is where the notice system starts to merge with financial intelligence, customs enforcement, anti-money laundering frameworks, and specialized investigative units. A case is no longer just about who crossed a border. It becomes about how criminal systems finance themselves, hide their assets, and reproduce their methods internationally. That shift is critical because criminal organizations do not only need mobility and secrecy, they need durable infrastructure. And once investigators begin mapping that infrastructure, they confront an even larger problem. Not isolated offenders, but networks of connected people, entities, and jurisdictions that have to be coordinated against at scale. At a certain scale, international policing stops being a sequence of individual alerts and becomes a problem of system management. One fugitive can be tracked with a red notice. One missing child can be circulated through a yellow notice. But when authorities are dealing with trafficking routes, cyber fraud ecosystems, terrorism-linked facilitation, sanctions evasion, or transnational gang structures, the challenge is no longer just identifying a person. It is coordinating many institutions around a shared operational picture. This is where Interpol's notice system functions as part of a wider platform rather than a set of isolated color codes. Notices gain value when they are linked to databases, border screening tools, fingerprint and DNA records, travel document checks, stolen vehicle files, and analytical support units. In other words, the notice is often the visible front end of a deeper coordination architecture. It tells member countries what matters, but the wider system helps explain why it matters and how separate fragments connect. Operationally, that allows countries to synchronize action across very different agencies. Border police may identify movement patterns. Financial investigators may detect related transactions. Customs officers may intercept cargo linked to the same network. Domestic detectives may connect aliases, communications devices, or forged documents to an existing investigation. Once those signals begin to reinforce each other, the notice is no longer just a warning. It becomes an anchor point for multinational case building. This shift has become more important as criminal enterprises adopt business-like structures. Many networks now separate logistics, finance, recruitment, communications, and enforcement into semi-specialized layers. That means police responses also have to become layered. An arrest in one country may disrupt only one node unless the surrounding infrastructure is mapped and shared internationally. That is why Interpol's system should be understood as a force multiplier for national agencies, not a replacement for them. It helps different states act on the same network from different angles at the same time. But the larger and more sensitive that coordination becomes, the more important another question becomes as well. Who decides what information can enter the system, and what safeguards prevent that system from being misused? An international alert system is only as credible as the rules that govern it. The more powerful the circulation network becomes, the more important it is to define what can be entered, how it is reviewed, and where the boundaries lie. That is why Interpol's notice system is not simply a technical pipeline for member states. It is also a rules-based framework shaped by constitutional limits, data controls, and formal review mechanisms designed to preserve legitimacy across very different legal systems. At the center of that framework is a basic principle. Interpol is not supposed to intervene in matters of a political, military, religious, or racial character. That restriction is not a side note. It is one of the system's defining safeguards. Because member countries have different political institutions, legal traditions, and domestic conflicts, the organization has to filter requests that would turn police cooperation into an instrument for non-policing disputes. Without that boundary, the notice system could lose the trust that makes international cooperation possible in the first place. Operationally, this means requests are not meant to circulate untouched simply because a member country submits them. They are assessed against Interpol's rules, data requirements, and compliance standards. The underlying legal basis matters. The description of the offense matters. The context matters. In especially sensitive cases, The question is not only whether the person is wanted, but whether the request fits the organization's mandate at all. This review layer is critical because the notice system depends on confidence from both sides of the exchange. States need to believe that incoming alerts are serious enough to act on. Individuals need mechanisms to challenge data they believe has been wrongly processed. And Interpol itself needs procedures strong enough to preserve neutrality while still moving quickly. As the system expanded, governance became just as important as technology. A fast network without oversight would invite distrust. A tightly restricted network without speed would lose operational value. Interpol therefore has to balance circulation with control, and once that balance is established, the next question becomes practical rather than legal. How do these notices actually move through the police, border, and database systems that make them operational in the real world? A notice has no practical value unless it appears where real decisions are made. That means at passport control booths, police terminals, immigration desks, investigative databases, and national coordination centers operating around the clock. The operational life of an Interpol notice begins after publication, when it enters the daily workflows of officers who may have only seconds to recognize a match and decide what to do next. This is where the system becomes logistical rather than symbolic. A notice is circulated through Interpol's secure communications environment and made accessible to national authorities through their own connected systems. Some countries integrate that information deeply into border screening and police databases. Others rely on more selective access through specialized units. Either way, the decisive point is the same. The alert must reach the institution most likely to encounter the person, object, or pattern in question. In practice, that creates many possible points of contact. A red notice subject may be identified during entry screening at an airport. A yellow notice case may surface when local police encounter a child whose identity does not match accompanying documents. A purple or orange notice may become relevant when customs officers inspect cargo and recognize a concealment method already circulated internationally. The notice itself does not solve the case. It places the right information in the right institutional hands at the right moment. That also means speed and data quality are inseparable. A notice with poor identifiers, outdated travel information, or incomplete legal details may sit in the system without producing action. A well-prepared notice can generate immediate hits across multiple jurisdictions because it is built for operational use, not just formal circulation. The entire process depends on interoperability between global alerts and national databases. This layer explains why Interpol is ultimately an infrastructure organization as much as a policing one. Its influence comes from connecting national systems, not replacing them. But once notices begin moving through frontline institutions at scale, another challenge emerges. A system this dependent on data quality, timing, and national follow-through is only as effective as the people and procedures maintaining it behind the scenes. Behind every Interpol notice is an administrative machine that rarely appears in public discussion. The headlines focus on fugitives, cross-border arrests, or dramatic alerts. But the system only functions because thousands of decisions are made long before any officer at a checkpoint sees a match. Drafting, validating, translating, formatting, reviewing, routing, updating, and sometimes deleting notice data are all part of the operational cycle. In that sense, the notice system is as dependent on disciplined bureaucracy as it is on policing. This is where national central bureaus become decisive. They are not symbolic liaison officers. They are the institutions that translate domestic investigations into internationally usable notices and translate international alerts back into national action. Their staff have to understand both worlds at once: local legal requirements, judicial documentation, and investigative priorities on one side, Interpol rules, data standards, and communication protocols on the other. If that translation is weak, the entire notice loses operational value. The quality of a notice often reflects the quality of the preparation behind it. A strong submission includes reliable identifiers, legally coherent case information, updated photographs or biometrics where available, and a clear explanation of what other countries are being asked to do. A weak submission creates friction. It may confuse foreign authorities, trigger additional review, or fail to generate useful hits even when the subject is moving internationally. In a network built on speed, poor preparation becomes a strategic liability. There is also a maintenance burden that outsiders rarely see. Cases evolve, warrants expire, extradition requests succeed or collapse, missing persons are found, new aliases emerge, deaths are confirmed. Every one of those changes has to be reflected in the international system, or the network begins circulating stale data. That makes notice management a continuous process rather than a one-time publication event. This hidden layer explains why the notice system is not simply a catalog of alerts. It is a living operational registry that must be constantly curated. And once that becomes clear, the final strategic question comes into view. What role does this entire architecture play in a world where mobility, data, and geopolitical tension are all increasing at the same time? In strategic terms, Interpol notices exist because modern sovereignty has a practical weakness. States control their own territory, but crime does not stay inside it. Smugglers exploit jurisdictional seams. Fraud networks distribute tasks across continents. Traffickers move victims through transit states. Sanctions evaders hide ownership through layered intermediaries. The notice system is one of the mechanisms designed to reduce that gap, allowing national authorities to project awareness beyond their borders without surrendering legal control to a supranational police body. That balance is the system's defining feature. Interpol expands reach, but not sovereignty. It improves visibility, but not automatic enforcement. It accelerates cooperation, but still depends on the willingness, legal capacity, and institutional competence of member states. In that sense, the notice architecture is a tool for synchronizing national power, not replacing it. Its strategic value comes from making fragmented jurisdictions act with greater informational unity. This is especially important in a world shaped by asymmetry. Criminal networks often need only one weak border, one permissive registry, one vulnerable transit corridor, or one slow information exchange to keep operating. States, by contrast, need consistency. They need the same name, identifier, modus operandi, or threat pattern to be recognized across dozens of separate institutions. Notices help create that consistency. They allow a suspect in one investigation, a missing person in another, and a concealed trafficking method in a third to become part of a wider operational picture. The real significance of the system, then, is not the dramatic image of international pursuit. It is the quieter construction of shared awareness across police, border, customs, and judicial systems that would otherwise remain partially disconnected. That shared awareness does not end transnational crime, but it changes the operating environment by making movement, anonymity, and repetition harder to sustain. And that leads directly to the final layer of the story. If notices are really instruments of global coordination rather than global command, then the ultimate question is not what color means what. It is what this entire machinery reveals about how international order now works under pressure. The deeper reality behind Interpol notices is that they are not merely categories of alerts. They are evidence of a broader transformation in international governance. In earlier eras, law enforcement cooperation often depended on slower diplomatic channels, personal liaison relationships, and case-by-case exchanges that could be disrupted by distance, politics, or bureaucracy. Today, the pressure comes from a different environment. High-speed travel, digital communication, transnational finance, and criminal networks that adapt faster than traditional institutions were built to respond. Interpol's notice system is one answer to that pressure. It creates a standardized language for urgency across legal cultures that do not always define crime, evidence, or procedure in exactly the same way. A color-coded notice allows different states to recognize the nature of a request even before they respond to it. That does not eliminate legal differences, but it gives those differences a common operational starting point. In practical terms, it helps convert international disorder into something more manageable. This is also why the system matters beyond policing alone. Notices affect border management, migration screening, customs enforcement, financial compliance, disaster victim identification, and child protection. They connect institutions that may not usually think of themselves as part of the same mission, but are increasingly forced into shared operational space. A border officer, forensic specialist, cyber investigator, and anti-money laundering analyst may all interact with different layers of the same international case. At the same time, the notice system reflects a permanent tension in the modern world. States want the benefits of rapid cross-border coordination without giving up control over their own legal authority. Interpol helps manage that tension by serving as an information platform rather than an enforcement sovereign. Its notices are strongest when they create alignment, not when they create the illusion of a world government. That is the strategic lesson of the entire structure. The colors matter, the procedures matter, and the databases matter, but taken together, they point toward an even larger conclusion, one best understood by stepping back from the alerts themselves and looking at the geopolitical ecosystem they now help hold together. In the end, Interpol's notice system is best understood not as a dramatic instrument of instant global justice, but as a disciplined framework for managing fragmentation in an interconnected world. It exists because modern states face a structural contradiction. Their laws, courts, and police powers are bounded by territory, while the problems they confront, increasingly, are not. Notices help close that gap by making national investigations legible across borders without dissolving the legal authority of the states involved. That is why the system's real significance lies in function, not symbolism. A red notice may attract public attention, but the broader architecture is what gives it meaning. Blue, black, yellow, green, orange, and purple notices each address a different operational challenge, identifying the unknown, locating the missing, warning against repeat offenders, flagging imminent dangers, or exposing criminal methods. Together, they create a modular language for international police cooperation, one built around circulation, recognition, and response. Its future importance is likely to grow, not shrink. Criminal organizations are becoming more networked, more digital, and more adaptive. Fraud now scales through online platforms. Illicit finance moves through layered, global systems. Human trafficking routes shift quickly in response to enforcement pressure. Identity manipulation, encrypted communications, and synthetic documentation all complicate traditional policing. In that environment, a notice system cannot remain static. It has to become faster, more accurate, more integrated with data systems, and more carefully governed at the same time. That final tension may define the system's next era. The demand for speed will keep increasing, but so will the need for scrutiny, due process, and trust. A global alert network that moves too slowly loses relevance. One that moves without credible safeguards loses legitimacy. Interpol's challenge is to preserve both, and that is the clearest way to understand its role in the modern world. It is not a global police force standing above nations. It is something more technical and, in many ways, more consequential. A shared operating system that helps sovereign states respond to threats that no longer respect sovereign borders.